Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to In Focus. Today we are talking about the Métis and non-status being excluded from the proposed 60 Scoop settlement. It was announced in October of last year. And we want you to join in on our conversation. Our phone lines are open. Call us toll free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus. Use the hashtag Métis Scoop. Before I introduce you to our guests, let's set the scene. John Murray will catch us up with what's been happening with the proposed settlement.
The firm contracted to manage the applications and settlement for the 60 Scoop lawsuit has released the agreement in principle for the settlement. There are anywhere from 20,000 to 200,000 survivors that may be eligible for this settlement. They can now participate in developing the details of the final agreement, which the government has capped at a maximum of $750 million. Survivors who don't like the agreement in principle will have the opportunity to go to court at their own expense to present their objections. But this agreement in principle still does not include compensation for Métis and non-status adoptees. And that doesn't sit well with the Assembly of First Nations. Last year they passed a resolution that rejects any settlement that does not include all Aboriginal peoples. The AFN says they will fight this current agreement. APTN National News reached Lee McMillan by telephone. He is a lawyer with DD West LLP, the firm supported by the AFN resolution.
Well, our thoughts are overwhelmingly negative. We do not believe that what is being proposed in this proposed settlement agreement is fair, reasonable, or in the best interests of the 60 Scoop survivors across Canada. So we will be using every tool in our arsenal to ensure that the agreement in its current form is not finalized.
Some say $750 million is too little. If there are as many as 100,000 survivors applying, that will only be $7,500 each. And nothing for Métis and non-status Indians.
We are joined in studio by Robert Doucette, the former president of the Metis Nation of Saskatchewan. He was taken from his family when he was just 6 months old and placed with a non-Aboriginal family. Robert recently announced his intentions to sue the federal and Saskatchewan governments over the 60 Scoop. We're also joined by Kyra Wilson. Kyra is Robert's eldest daughter and has worked as an advocate for Indigenous families in Manitoba, caught up in the current child welfare system. Kyra is currently a master's student in social work at the University of Manitoba. Our pleasure to have you both here in studio with us. And joining us from our Ottawa studio is Duane Morrisseau-Beck, the director of the National Indigenous Survivors of Child Welfare Network. Duane, real pleasure to have you join us from Ottawa as well.
Thank you, Dennis.
Robert, if we could start with you, and I wonder if you'd be willing to share some of your story with us.
Yes, 56 years ago, on February 28th, 1962, I was born. And about six or 7 months after I was born, social services came to my community and they scooped me. And the day that they scooped me, they didn't really tell anybody, and one of my aunties informed our family that they were taking me, and the day that they took me, my mushroom was running after the car and was actually swearing and throwing rocks at the car. And he spoke 5 languages and was swearing at all the languages that I understand. And they took me. And then, if I could just bring this, about 3 years ago, when I was 53, my mother says, "I have something for you. I've kept it for 53 years, and I want you to have it, but it might make you cry." And I said, "Okay, maybe it'll make me cry." She went to her closet and brought this out. She said, "This is your baby sweater the day they took you. They took this off of you. I kept this for 53 years. I held it in my arm every day, or every birthday, February 28th, I held it so I could remember you, that I loved you, that we never forgot about you, and we missed you, and we wanted you to come home." So for 50 years, my mother held this sweater, and on my 53rd year, she gave it to me. We all cried that day. So, you know, it's been a journey. I met my mother when I was actually 20 years old. I was playing on a native senior hockey team, a gentleman from Buffalo and Arrows, and they didn't actually believe I was a Mackay. And And my auntie Julia Pitzel came to know Balford, and I met with her, and she said, I said to her when I met with her, I said, "Are you my mother?" And she goes, "No, but your family's been looking for you for 20 years. So she gave me my mother's phone number, who was Diane Mackay Ludwig, who lives in Lac La Biche. And we phoned, and the day that we met, I remember walking down the street, and this young man and I looked at each other, and you know how you kind of look at each other and you're gunning each other off. And I looked at this guy and I thought, well, who is this guy? But I don't have time for that. So I walked into Boston Pizza, and I walked around this, the restaurant, and I walked up. I knew who my mom was when I walked in there, but I just tried to play it cool. And I walked up to her and I said, "Are you Diane Mackay?" And she stood up. She said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Are you Robert Mackay?" I said, "Yes, I am." And we hugged each other, and again we were crying. Who walks in about 5 minutes later? It's the young guy that we were gunning off each other. That was my younger brother, Peter. Mm-hmm. So, I've had a relationship with them ever since, and now I found out that I actually have I have 6 other biological brothers and 6 biological sisters from 2 different families, and tried to make my journey back to the family that I belong to, and it's still a journey every day dealing with this, because as my mother said in a letter that she wrote to Prime Minister Canada, she said, you took one thing away from my son that he'll never hear. And that was to hear him say, "I love you" in Cree. And I'm sorry I kind of get worked up about that, but it's
hard not to.
It's hard not to, when things are taken away from you, and I'm not the only one. There are thousands of kids that feel the same way, Métis, First Nations, and Inuit kids that have been denied their families. And so that's my journey.
And Duane, hearing that journey and those traumatic experiences that have stayed with you for decades, it might seem obvious, but why have you filed this lawsuit? Why are you seeking?
Well, I think for a number of reasons. Number one, again, just relating back to my family, in 1906, my mushroom, Celestin Mackay, was guaranteed with his family 240 acres of land. It's 112 years later, we're still waiting. My family, when they had the Primrose Lake bombing range, they were living on the McCusker River. The federal and provincial governments now created the Primrose Lake bombing range where they bomb and strafe. They kicked my family out of there. And they took my grandfather to the residential school. They scooped me up. And all along, Métis people, including my family, have been told by successive governments, including Carolyn Bennett now, just wait. Just wait, we'll get you. Next phase. And I'm tired of being told to wait. And so when on October 6th, when Minister Bennett said that there was going to be an apology, and she gave one in compensation, and when I heard and realized that the Métis were taking out of it, it really left me in a state of shock and disbelief, and I just thought to myself, enough is enough. The only time that the provincial and federal governments ever listen to Indigenous people in this country is when we're suing them. And that's a very sad statement on this country when that has to come to that, because they know Indigenous people don't have a lot of money, and they have us over a barrel. So, a case like this will probably run you one individual $100,000. So it's not a cheap undertaking.
Duane, let's go to you in Ottawa, and you feel there was a failure to consult 60 Scoop survivors on this proposed settlement agreement. What are your concerns with how this has all unfolded so far?
Well, I think, thank you for having me on the show, first of all. And I think for us, 60 Scoop survivors are a community. And, through the work through the national network, we've had gatherings where we've brought, 60 Scoop survivors from Canada, United States, and even as far as New Zealand. And we've brought them together as a community, and we have bonded. And the issue of the litigation that was going forward, that we heard that was going through the courts, sort of resonated with us in terms of these things going forward without our voice. And I really think at this point in time, with a number of initiatives going on across the country, like the Missing and Murdered Indigenous File and so forth, that the survivors are wanting to have their voice heard. And when the announcement came in October, that was, more than like a shock to the community. And then after fully realizing some of the provisions within the agreement, it started another shock. And then, of course, then people started to talk within the community across the country, thinking that their voices weren't being heard. And so we're seeing this manifest across the country in the cities and in communities across Canada.
And Robert, going back to your legal action, and you feel that 60 Scoop Métis survivors have no options left, I guess, other than to take legal action.
No, we have no other action to this because, to be quite honest, I'm not waiting for another politician in Ottawa to deal with the Métis issues. All along, and as I hearken back to my last statement, the Mackay family have been waiting for respect and justice since 1906. And now you've just heaped on another just wait. And the province of Saskatchewan, with now Premier Moe, has said that, actually prior to that, 3 years ago, Premier Brad Wall, the then Premier, said that he was going to apologize. Their position has been that there will be no compensation. But in fact, there was one case in Saskatchewan already, and some say it is a 60 Scoop case, and some say it isn't. It's the Vince Vandel case, where a foster child was actually compensated by the provincial government for $110,000. So you know what? When you don't feel like you're being respected, and you don't feel like there is justice, and you keep hearing the same thing over and over again, what's your final recourse? You have no recourse but to seek legal counsel. I have legal counsel, and his name is Doug Racine. He's in Saskatchewan, and he's actually a Manitoba Métis from the Turtle Mountain, but he has taken on this case willingly. And now, as I speak, as I had said to Minister Bennett and now Premier Moe, there are now 2 more Métis cases that have been filed against the federal government and the province of Saskatchewan to date, and those are my 2 sisters, Eileen and Geraldine. So I just think that, I'm happy that we keep hearing this word reconciliation and healthy community. But when you are left out of the equation and you're being told over and over again to wait, then you have to take matters into your own hands. And this is our final recourse. And of course, I did file a human rights complaint against Canada, and I am waiting for a letter from them to see what exactly their position is and what they're going to do with my human rights complaint against Canada.
Kyra, I mean, for us, hearing your father's story is difficult. What's it been like for your family all these years?
Well, as I was, a young child, I didn't really know the story. As I became a parent to my own little girl, and as I got older, I started hearing more of my father's story. And it's really sad and disheartening, actually, that this happened to my father and to my cookum. She's an amazing woman. She's so strong, so smart, and the fact that somebody felt that they could come into our family's home and take my father, it angers me. It's another reason why I decided to, study social work and to be a part of that and to be a part of the movement where we're saying, enough is enough when it comes to taking our children. And that's why I sit here today with my father, supporting him. So.
And I definitely want to pick up a little later on your experience with what's been taking place in today's child welfare system. But I understand we have a caller on the line from the Northwest Territories, a survivor of the Scoop, NOELINE from the Northwest Territories. Hi, NOELINE, can you hear us?
Hello?
Hi, NOELINE. Hi, you're live with us here now. Your experience with the 60 Scoop.
Hi, good afternoon. Marcy Cho, Jean Willis Chat, and Nahel Yas PC. Alunat Marcy, the Sierras in Sitsiat. So, what I just said, and I'll translate that. I thank you this afternoon for allowing me to speak, but I want to thank the people there that are speaking from my heart. Thank you. So I've been watching and been doing some advocating work also, I guess most of my life, because I've been in the residential school process, because they also put us in there if they didn't have room for us in foster homes or group homes or their receiving homes. So my concern is that even though the government has acknowledged what they have done, another behavior they're continuing is not consulting. Now, we're in the Northwest Territories, and this process is happening in the East. So the way I've looked at the whole process and studied it and stepped outside the box to understand why we're put in this process. And of course, we know the agendas of the government, to take us off the land. That's the one thing I do know for a fact that they had to do, was ensure there are no tribal people living in the areas they want to develop. So that was another reason that they took the children off the land, because the parents will follow, okay? And so I was taken on and off over time, but my grandparents took me when I was 10 months old because my grandfather did not want us to go in the system. So he took us, and my brother and I were raised with my mother's younger siblings. So this is why I speak my language today. My point also is that I am of mixed blood. I am also a Mackay. We know of the fur trade and how some of our people went up and down the river system. So we're also Mackays in the Northwest Territories. There's bloodline up there. Now, I find that the government, what they've been doing in the past is giving out these contracts. The federal government gives a contract, for example, to the territorial government. The territorial government then contracts out to group homes. If they don't have one, they create one. If there's not one that's able to contract to the government, they will create an institution. So this is where we've been placed for so long in all these different institutions and that.
NOELINE,
now, as a child growing up in these institutions, the one thing that I found, and a lot of the survivors will, back up this point, is that there was no compassion nor empathy by the workers at times, by the social workers. But back in the day, there were no social workers. What they used was administrators.
Sorry,
so today,
NOELINE, I apologize. I do have to cut you off there. My apologies. I do appreciate you taking the time, though, to call in and share your story with us. But we do have to take a short break. But first, if you would like to join the conversation, here's how. Join our conversation now. Send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Like our APTN InFocus Facebook page. Follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus or call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Welcome back to In Focus, and we're going to go to some social media now to hear what some of you have been saying about today's topic, and we asked, what are your thoughts about Métis and non-status being left out of the proposed settlement? And so we'll go to some of your comments here, and Barbara says, ridiculous. Métis were recognized as equals to First Nations rights. Is their suffering less than that of any other peoples? And to Christina on Facebook, it's just everyone for themselves, like always. And if non-status has no one at the table, why does anyone else need to care? Over to Nancy and her comment, Métis were not scooped away from reserves. They did not even live on reserves. Not all Aboriginal groups were treated the same in Canada. Learn your history. And of course, you can find more of these comments on our Facebook and Twitter pages. From Bernadette, Indian Affairs does not protect the Indigenous peoples by their laws either, but yet they still have to hire lawyers to defend their claims. And we'll go to at Sethalos. This is from Twitter. And if the Aboriginal communities can't get their collective stuff together to agree on a settlement proposal or offer by the Canadian government, how in the hell are they supposed to solve the issues? And from Lorraine, did we learn nothing from the Riel resistance? What were the Métis fighting for? It's not a fair settlement until it's fair for everyone. And finally, here from Tina, karma for the Métis. They should have stood up for the non-status when they were fighting to regain their status, leaving the non-status to fight for themselves. And there's plenty more of these comments. If you'd like to add your opinion to our topic or conversation, here's how. Join our conversation now. Send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Like our APTN InFocus Facebook page. Follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus or call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. As you may have heard this week, the Métis have secured a meeting with the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations after being excluded from the Sixties Scoop compensation proposal. Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand will be sitting down with Carolyn Bennett in the coming weeks. President Chartrand joined us earlier to speak about it. President Chartrand, thanks for joining us. We understand that the Liberal government is somehow looking to rectify what went on with the 60 Scoop and Métis, and that Minister Bennett has written to you. Can you tell us what's about to take place?
Well, Dennis, let me start off by saying I'm very pleased that the government is taking an approach they are. They are very clear they want to deal with an unsettled matter, clearly that still resonates strong in the hearts of many of our citizens in the prairies. Of course, the 60 Scoop was very dramatic to many of our families. We lost hundreds upon hundreds of our children. And actually, I always used it. If you go back and throw out my comments the last over 20 years, I've been arguing this file and arguing that our children were sold to the United States and passed on outside the country, so there was no cost left for Canada or the provinces. So, but unfortunately, there was a lot of damage and heartbreak that occurred. We ourselves commenced our own search. We actually called it a Lost Mogson program. And back in the 80s, we started doing fundraising. Nobody assisted us, of course, and nobody was helping us search for these children. But we began to find them, of course, as now adults in the United States. And we were able to reconnect them with their kin back here in Manitoba. And I'm telling you, Dennis, I sat in some of these gatherings and some of these reunifications that were happening. We did a lot of bake sales, bingos, you name it, and to raise money to bring them home. And there was a lot of tears shed, a lot of heartbreak, some anger, strong anger sometimes from those children now became adults who were told when they were living in the United States that either their parents were dead or their parents didn't want them and they were cast away. That's why they were living with a new family. And so they always had this hardship. Why would my family want me? Or the hardship of thinking that their parents were dead and they had no kin. And I sat there and cried along with some of them, along with some of my own cabinet. And so we were able to at least, I think, bring over 30 of them home ourselves or more. I'd have to get that exact number from my department. But we did it on our own. And some of them actually, but Dennis, the sad part is that when you look at the full story, even with if you did some kind of analysis, with the ones we brought home, the percentage of it was a good family, some good memories were very small. They more or less felt that they were like slaves for a lot of these farmers out there that actually adopted them and took them. Actually, we even had one that was shipped in with just a pair of shorts and landed in Toronto because I guess at the age of 18, they got to reapply for their citizenship, and a lot of the adoptees that took these, or adopters that took the adoptees, or Métis kids, didn't reapply at 18, and one was charged with some kind of offense, and then find out he's then an alien, considered an alien in the United States, and they shipped him out and landed him in Toronto. And we were fortunate a month before that we had a contact with him. He was searching all over in the west, in the prairies, and he found his home here in Manitoba, and actually he comes from a small Métis community not far from Duck Bay. So you look at it from that side, it was quite interesting, but thank God we found him before that, or else he would have been sitting in Toronto with a pair of shorts and a T-shirt, because he comes from the far southern part of the United States, and where he would have turned to, who he went to, and he didn't know no family. So we were fortunate to already connect him a month prior to the United States deporting him here with no warning, nothing. Slapped him on a plane and shipped him out.
President Chartrand, we're hearing from some Métis survivors of the 60s scoop that the grassroots aren't being consulted by the MMF. What would you say to those concerns?
Well, you know, you'll never please 100% of anything. But if people are saying I'm not consulting with them, that'd be strange, because we consult with anybody and everybody through we have a very powerful communication strategy campaign at the Federation. And again, some people may want to individually pursue matters and believe they'll do better on their own. But from a collective standpoint, I think it's very clear the Métis government is advancing on this. Some of the things I'm concerned about, Dennis, is that a lot of lawyers have signed up so many of our citizens, and not one is filed in the courts of Manitoba. But at the end of the day, if there's any settlement, I guarantee you they'll be looking at a very certain percentage that they want to be championed off to their paychecks to the lawyers. I have concerns on that. The Métis government will not charge a dime. Our job is to fight for our people and get what we believe is owing to them. And at the end of the day, I'm concerned that lawyers are going to try to make money on this. And so if people are complaining, I'd love to know the names, Dennis, because I don't know of anybody. And you know me, I travel everywhere in this province. So from my perspective, the people have given me the mandate to move on this file, and I'm moving on it not only for Manitoba, but the Métis Nation of Canada.
President Chartrand, appreciate you taking the time to join us.
No, thank you very much, Dennis.
And let's bring our guests back in, and maybe Duane, if we could get you to react to some of what President Chartrand was saying there, that feels plenty of consultation is taking place, has taken place.
Well, I mean, I think President Chartrand, I know him personally, and I know of him as working hard for the people, and I actually had a brief meeting with him in December in Ottawa to talk a little bit about raising the voices for Métis 60 scoop survivors. And I was clear with him that it's important that Métis survivors are consulted, that they're part of any kind of discussion that would go forward in any kind of agreement. And this is the position of the National Network vis-a-vis for all Indigenous peoples. And we've worked with one of his ministers, Andrew Carrier, to move on a Métis 60 scoop Métis roundtable, which is something that I understand is still in the works. They were preparing a position paper that was going to be used to support some form of funding process so that they could begin some of those preliminary discussions. And I think that's sort of the route that we're going forward. One of our concerns as 60 Scoop survivors is political organizations beginning to take the reins. And in all due respect to our politicians, the message from 60 Scoop survivors is that we need to be heard, and we articulated that in our press conference last week, to the federal government. But we're also going to be messaging to the political organizations, and any organization that wants to do this work is to make sure that 60 Scoop survivors are part of the conversation. And so, we're starting to see this part of the reason why this is sort of has come into play is an example is from the Manitoba apology. The government at that time only consulted 20 people and then did an apology, but the Métis, from my understanding, weren't really part of that process. And so these type of actions that have gone on have really triggered and have caused great harm. And as Métis people and as the 60 Scoop people, we are a collective people, and so we need to make sure that our voices are heard.
You mentioned the Manitoba apology, and I know I'd like to go to the phone lines here because somebody who I remember well from that day of that apology is Stewart, and he's on the phone now joining us in Manitoba, and he's also one of the plaintiffs in these cases. And Stewart, thanks for calling in.
You're welcome.
Stewart, you wanted to add your voice to this conversation?
Yeah, first I wanted to thank Robert for taking the time and the strength, and Kyra for being there to do this. This is it's an emotional time. It's an intense time for everybody. But one of the things is that when I lived in California and I moved back to Manitoba 2 years ago, due to the 60 Scoop, I did not know what Métis were, and I assumed that the lawsuit was going to be the equation was First Nations babies taking and put into non-Aboriginal homes. So now that this case is turned into a diverse situation, we're not happy with the settlement either. We called it a drive-by settlement. It was too fast moving. It was a wham bam, thank you, ma'am, and we're not happy. So one of the things is dividing us. I appreciate the time that Duane puts into his hard work and Kyra and her dad to be there. That's a huge statement. That when this case came out, I was shocked. I was blindsided by the announcement. So it's one of those things where I have a perspective that moving back to Manitoba, it's like I stepped into a time warp, and I'm going to make sure that I do everything I can in my power to help with the case. And that we all need to work together and sort of, tell Canada that, I'm not just from Canada. I'm from California, and I have a huge diverse background with a lot of things. But I know kind of that moving back here was a huge maneuver for me. It was hard on me, but at the same time, it's just a time for us to get together and be able to have people like Robert on TV doing the groundwork for our people. It's got to happen, and Canada needs to know that it's got to happen. And I don't want to be divided into groups. Unfortunately, I didn't know what Métis were, so it's my learning experience coming back here, and we'll go from there. So thanks for taking my call.
Stewart, we appreciate you calling in and for all the speaking that you've been doing since you've returned to Manitoba. You're a recognizable face to many of us here on this issue. Robert, anything you wanted to pick up on there that you've heard from the three of our guests?
Well, I want to thank Stewart also for having the strength and to move that whole thing forward and just some of the things that I've heard this afternoon. I am happy to say that in Saskatchewan, 60 Scoop survivors, First Nations, non-status, and Métis are all working together. We're all working together, and as 60 Scoop Indigenous survivors of Saskatchewan. And so that's the first thing I want to say. So you know what? we are a resolute group, and we are actually organizing chapters all over the province. I would also add that this isn't an easy topic to deal with, but why doesn't Canada and why didn't Saskatchewan just, work together, come out together with a joint statement, all the provinces, and really make this a reconciliation moment, But no, they have to divide and conquer people again, and as a result of that, you see some of the emails people telling us to get our act together. And Harry Daniels actually showed us the way. When you look at what really happens at a community level when something happens is when a community leader with a community-based support actually says enough is enough. And that's what Harry Daniels has done. And that's what we're doing now. And we're saying that, look at, thank you, David CHARTRAND, for your words. In Saskatchewan, we didn't hear nothing from the Metis Nation of Saskatchewan. We waited for it. We wanted it. We didn't hear nothing. So you know what? I finally said enough was enough. Our Métis people are suffering in Saskatchewan. They're making us fight over money. And so, the only time, again, as I've repeated to this, Métis 60 Scoop survivors, First Nations and Inuit, we will deal with our own issues. We have done the heavy lifting, and we're going to continue moving forward with our agenda. And Minister Bennett and Premier Moe of Saskatchewan should get ready, because we have the determination, the motivation, and the education to deal with this issue, and we're not going to stop until we see two words: justice and respect.
We were in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago for the show on child welfare there, and the big summit being hosted by the federal government. And Kyra, I'm wondering, as someone who worked in the child welfare system, advocating for families, if you're seeing any similarities between the 60 Scoop and what people are calling the millennial scoop.
Similarities, most definitely. I think when you use the term similarity, it actually takes away from it's the same thing happening. Everything that the government has done has removed our children from their homes, and we're still seeing it today. It's in my family we have residential school survivors, 60 Scoop survivors. One of my grandfathers went to a sanatorium. There's all these really horrifying and traumatic experiences that family members of mine have been through, and we're just trying to get through it. We're trying to heal and get that respect that my father's talking about, and the recognition, and really that's what it's about, is Canada recognizing what they're doing still today. And the Millennium Scoop, it is happening, and they are still taking our children, and as we sit here today, it's still happening. So,
we're gonna go to a break here quickly or soon, but I'm wondering if we could grab one more caller quickly. And Bill Stewart, who's now, I understand, in BC, was scooped from his family in Ontario. Bill, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Thanks for taking my call, Dennis.
Thanks for calling in. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. First off, I wanted to join Stewart in thanking Robert for taking this on, and because I agree completely. It's the only way to get this government to take us seriously is to go at them head on. And so, I was looking at it that someone needs to do this, and I myself, I don't think I could stand through the process of it. But for all of us, thank you so much for doing this. Some of the points that people were making earlier, some of the things you took off social media, like people were saying we need to really define what we want as a settlement from this government in order to to get some kind of response. And I think that's something that the National Indigenous Survivors of Child Welfare Network is doing a good job in creating that consensus. I think we're in part of the reason why it took so long to get where we are is because the Harper government just delayed the Ontario case by appealing it. And now with I'm not a fan of the Trudeau government, but at least they're engaging in some way, although I don't feel they're really reconciling at all. I think they're just still trying to get away with the same policies and not really taking responsibility, and we have to push them on that. And I think I just wanted to make one other point. I think the one thing we have to keep in mind is that this government is very sensitive to international pressure and international perception, and the UN, how the UN perceives them. And that's one thing that we can do by bringing attention of what's going on to the UN. That helps apply pressure. If we look how this played out, Justin Trudeau made his famous speech to the UN on September 21st, 2017, acknowledging the treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada. But what he'd done is he'd signed this agreement August 30th. And so he goes and he makes that speech September 21st. And then October 6th, he announces this announcement. And it's like, it's like a magic trick on his part, voila. And he's using us in political theater to get what he wants from the UN. And I think we can use that against him. But that's and I don't know, Duane might have more to say on that because with his experience with the UN.
Well, Bill, we appreciate your call. We're going to have to leave it there because we do have to head to break, but thanks so much for calling in and sharing your voice with us. And we are going to head to break, so we'll be back in just a few minutes to continue the conversation. And welcome back to InFocus. We are running a bit short on time, so we'll head out to Duane in Ottawa. And Duane, your organization has called for a day of solidarity. What are your hopes for March 16th?
Well, we're really hoping and pushing for the Government of Canada to invite us to a meeting with the Minister and to articulate our concerns about the agreement, and also to move forward on a consultation process, possibly a national roundtable that would bring in the 60 Scoop organizations that are formed, the one that Robert spoke to you about in Saskatchewan, one in Alberta, and there is one in Manitoba, and I believe there's one being formed in Quebec. We are hoping that that's part of the outcomes of this rally. The other thing is that we are trying to form community, and we're also getting 60 Scoop survivors to sign the opposition form that we have with our campaign. And our website for that is 60scoopunited.com, and people can go there to sign a petition, but also sign the opposition form. And there's some information, Q's and A's on there regarding that. So we're really wanting to put the pressure and to ensure that our voices are heard, that we are heard. And so this is sort of the trajectory that we're going right now.
And Duane, while we still have you there in Ottawa, the group has been critical of the compensation, the funding that was announced, especially given that lawyers look to be taking away about $75 million or so here. If you don't mind sharing your thoughts on all of that with us.
Well, I mean, I think if you look at some of the stuff that happened to most of us, you've heard stories from Robert, and there are many stories out there that talk about, there was sexual abuse, there was physical abuse, there was forced labor, there was loss of human potential. I mean, even access to our treaty rights and Métis rights and Inuit rights, like these things were not we didn't have access to. So, I mean, I heard a couple of weeks ago Colleen Rajat talk about the fact that she paid for her own education, but she was treaty Indian and should have had access to those treaty rights. And so when you look at the formula and you look at the amounts that are being put on the table and sort of the damages that have been caused to 60 Scoop survivors, those don't seem to match. And so I think people are really wanting, I think the real issue here is that the full story isn't really being told. And so there's this this lawsuit that's talking about culture and culture and loss of culture, but it's much more than that. So I think when you look at the entire agreement, the money that's being allocated is minuscule compared to the damages that we suffered on behalf of Canada. And also when we look at the law firms that are receiving, in the amount of $75 million, that really just puts everything into perspective as who's benefiting from this agreement. And so, those are really hard things to sort of swallow if you are a 60 Scoop survivor that have gone through years and years and years of trauma and loss of potential and loss of connection to your family and communities. And we think about this from a collective, but on a personal perspective, we've lost so much. And so we hear that people say no amount of money will ever put that into play, but I think there needs to be some proper financial compensation that will enable us to be able to sort of carry on and do the healing that we need to do, to maybe go forward on some of our aspirations that we sort of thought about way back when. And so I think that's something that we're giving thought to.
Thanks, Duane. And bringing it back here to Winnipeg, and we'll just welcome Paige, who's joining us here on the desk, as we have 3 generations here now on the desk with us. And Robert, we talk about financial compensation and no amount, but can you talk about what your suit is seeking, including an apology from the Saskatchewan government?
Well, a number of things that we're seeking. We're seeking an apology, first and foremost. I think Métis 60 Scoop survivors, First Nations in Inuit, want to tell their story, just like during the Indian residential school process. They want to tell their story. That's part of healing. And they want that opportunity to do that. The other thing is, when you look at the numbers of the current settlement, the $750 million, and I think the federal government is underestimating how many people are out there. They're saying that their base is $25,000 that they want to pay everybody. That's the lowest they want to pay, and that they would top it up. But if they get 100,000 people, their math isn't making any sense. They're only going to be able to pay people $7,500. So there has to be, people have to rethink this, and that's just for First Nations and Inuit. The Métis, as I have said in previous press statements, I'm going to let the courts decide this. We're going to argue our cases very eloquently. There are now 2 more cases in Saskatchewan. My sister Geraldine and my sister Eileen, the Liberties from Green Lake. And I think Duane is correct, and I want to thank Duane-Beck Morrisseau for all of the great work that the people in Ottawa have done to help us to organize in Saskatchewan. But at the end of the day, there is no money that can bring my grandfather back to tell me he loves me. But you look at this, I want Prime Minister Trudeau, Minister Bennett, and all the premiers of Saskatchewan, of Canada to see this. This is my family. We're strong now. My daughter is educated. This is the next generation, and I'm educated. And we've made our way back to reacculturate ourselves into our cultures. And I'm happy to say that our families are getting stronger. And the 60 Scoop survivors in Canada, the people that I know, we're united, and we're going to see this through. We are going to see this through.
We mentioned earlier, Kyra, you did work for the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs family advocate, and you're seeking your master's in social work now. Do you see a day where where a future government is apologizing for the practices of today, the so-called millennial scoop?
Yes, there will be the need for an apology. There's a need for an apology today. I mean, there's situations happening every single day where children are not growing up in their families, in their communities. And it is at the detriment of our children and the future generations. There is huge impacts to what happens when you remove children. The government owes me an apology because I didn't get to grow up around my cookum, my aunties, my uncle. The government owes my daughter an apology because she has a great grandmother that she doesn't get to spend nearly enough time with. And that's really saddening, actually, that, the government is going to have to apologize for the things that are happening today and for the things that have happened already. So yes, they will owe an apology to our families.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here today in studio. Robert Doucette, his eldest daughter Kyra, Paige, who joined us as well, and in our Ottawa studio, Duane Morrisseau-Beck. Duane, thanks again for taking the time out there to be with us as well. And we'll be back again next week for another episode of In Focus, Wednesday, 2 p.m. Central Time. Appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Sorry to the callers we couldn't get to, but the conversation continues online, so have a great day.